When I was first asked to give a talk on the theme of empower, I thought of the biggest way that I've been empowered in my life, and that has been my education. And this is the image that came to my mind. Except I was not the bear, I was the salmon, trying to make my way upstream against all odds to get my degrees. So for much of my life, I've felt disempowered and powerless. So I'm gonna go through some etymologies here with you. The word power comes from the French verb pouvoir, to be able to. So the things that you are able to do, what you can do. And I have felt most of my life disempowered and powerless. And this is because of a history of intergenerational trauma in my family on both sides. On my mother's side, we had trauma related to World War II and the Nazi invasion of Poland. On my father's side, there's a history of alcohol and substance abuse. So the term trauma comes from the Greek word for wound, and it refers to a way that a disturbing or distressing experience can be passed down from generation to generation and regenerate itself through generations of a family. As a child, I was largely ashamed of my family history and my heritage. Shame because I was associated with these people, and also humiliated. The word humiliate becomes from the word for humus, earth, but feeling like dirt, feeling less than. This all began to change in 7th grade when my first French teacher, Madame Calams, assigned us a class genealogy project. She wanted us to interview our grandparents, fill out this family tree, and learn about our history. I was mortified. I had no desire to share my history with my classmates, but the experience taught me a lot about my family. So to give you a little bit of context, Poland during World War II, this is what happened. The Nazis came in. They basically committed a cultural genocide that sought to humiliate, enslave, and disempower the Polish people. They came in and took down all the statues of Polish figures from history. They changed the street names from Polish names to German names. They forced the people into work camps. They had to wear this Polish letter P to designate themselves as Polish. There were signs on stores that said Polish people were not allowed. And the most impactful part of this genocide on my family was the elimination, basically, of education. There's a quote here from Himmler. "The sole goal of this schooling is to teach them simple arithmetic, nothing above the number 500, writing one's name, and the doctrine that it is divine law to obey the Germans. I do not think that reading is desirable." 2 children impacted by this policy of forced labor were my grandparents. This is my grandfather, Anthony Crook. He was taken from his family at around the age of 13 and shipped off about what is today a 9-hour car drive from his family to this town in Germany, Petersmark, where he had to work on a farm. He was pulled out of school. He was taken from his family. He lost his language because he had to learn German now. And his brother had to work in a coal mine. His oldest brother died in the resistance. My grandmother's family experienced a similar trauma. My great-grandmother at the time would have been in her 30s. My grandmother was probably a child of about 3-6 years old. Her entire family was taken, she, her 2 sisters, and her mother, to work in a weaving factory that would weave linens and cotton, and they had to live in an army barracks. In these places, a lot of the women were raped, and a lot of bad things happened. And when I had to do my project, my grandparents didn't even really want to share a lot of this. I've had to find this out myself through my own research, and that's the generational trauma that's manifested itself as a shame and humiliation. So I come back to that word humiliate as humus, meaning earth. They felt lower than dirt. And in the Nazi policy of cultural genocide in Poland, and making them wear the P and all of these things, was to humiliate them. They were considered a subspecies, a lower class of human. They even had a word for this, like Untermensch, which was a lower man. So my grandparents' trauma had multiple effects on my family. The shame and humiliation, and even I didn't want to research this for my class project. The lack of education made it so that my grandparents were never able to get really high-paying jobs. They had to work manual labor. They had to, and this had an impact on my mother and her siblings as well. They did not do well in school because of the language barriers. My grandfather never really got very good at speaking English. He would always ask my mom to read his mail and help him fill out paperwork. He never had much confidence. And this left me with an ambivalence of, on the one hand, shame of my heritage and culture, but also a thirst for education. But through the project of researching my family's genealogy, I was able to transform this shame into pride. And my grandparents' loss of education and losing their language even inspired me to learn more languages and to become a teacher. On my dad's side of the family, our intergenerational trauma took the form of a vicious cycle of alcoholism and substance abuse. And this goes back as far as I can even tell. My aunt likes to research our family genealogy. She even sent me an article once about back in the Wild West, our family, one of our ancestors got so drunk that he literally fell off a wagon and then sued the wagon driver for negligence. I grew up seeing my grandfather drink, my dad, my uncle, and then eventually my younger brothers followed in the history of substance abuse. So shame turned our trauma into a family secret that I felt like I had to keep. But the secrecy only perpetuated the cycle. My brothers and I had two choices. On the one hand, we could go down the path and follow my dad and imitate what we saw and repeat the cycle. Or we could break the cycle. And that is exactly what my education helped me to do. So these vignettes represent what my life was like around ages 2 to 6, some common daily occurrences. Coming home and finding my dad passed out drunk on the couch, wondering if he was dead. My parents fighting, waking me up on school nights even at all hours. Once we got pulled over on the side of the highway with me and my brother in the back seat and my dad was passed out in the driver's seat. Multiple car accidents. And the worst incident happened when I was about 7 years old. My dad had an alcohol withdrawal seizure, and he had to be rushed to the emergency room, and I was afraid he was going to die. Psychologists who talk about the roles of children in dysfunctional families have a few different character types of how children respond to situations like this. The lost child, the problem child, the enabler, the mascot, and the family hero. Through my research and therapy and all these things I've done since my childhood, I've realized I was the family hero. This is the golden child. This is the one who wants to get straight A's and help out and do everything perfect to cover up the family shame. And so some consequences of my adverse childhood experiences include introversion, low self-esteem, shame, codependency, and perfectionism. And this has been a blessing and a curse for me. My dad quit drinking periodically throughout my life and has relapsed. My brothers have followed in the footsteps. But the shame and coping mechanisms I developed have stayed with me over time. But education became a lifeline and a safe space that gave me validation and helped me combat this shame. So the word validate comes from the Latin valere, to be worth. And that is what my education did. It gave me value. It made me feel like I was worth something, and it helped me combat the worthlessness and shame I felt being a child of alcoholics and from my family's history with the Nazi takeover of Poland. My education also inspired my vocation. So vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, to call out, and that is becoming a French teacher is something that called out to me. And being in gifted and magnet schools and having these great teachers, it helped me discover something that I was just happened to be good at and really spoke to me. These were all letters in my 8th grade yearbook from like 5 different classmates wrote about how good I was at French and maybe I'll be fluent someday, and here I am, now I'm a French teacher. So it kind of found me, but thanks to my education, I discovered this. Flash forward to high school, I got to be in a rigorous IB program with amazing teachers and students. But back at home, my family's addiction issues were getting worse. My mom started working nights. She was in a physically demanding job that made her have a lot of surgeries, so the doctors prescribed her opioids. She got dependent on that. It caused mood swings and a lot of fights with us, and I would just hide in my room and do homework to avoid the crazy. And with my mom working nights, I sort of became a second mother. I would have to pick up my little brothers from school, do homework with them, cook dinner, clean the house. It was so much so that my brothers would even sometimes call me mom on accident, so I would just be like, they'd be like, Mom, Mom. I'm like, just say Mom Nika. I eventually got a job. My family didn't have a lot of money. I needed money to pay for my gas and things like that. And my oldest brother started following in my dad's footsteps. He was getting into trouble and went to juvenile detention. And I was kind of leading this double life. At home, it was all this chaos, but at school, it still remained a lifeline for me. I got to be surrounded by amazing peers and inspirational role models, and the IB program really gave me the tools I needed to succeed in college and beyond. Flash forward to college. My dad relapses. My mom's still taking the opioids. My oldest brother had a baby at 19, starts drinking, gets numerous DUIs. My two younger brothers start using drugs. But college, I was thriving. I've discovered my love of French. I had this amazing professor, Dr. Walters, and she was the first person who ever told me that it was okay to leave my family behind and focus on myself and focus on school. And she also exposed me to this book, Le Chemin de Longue Étude, which was written by Christine de Pizan, who was one of the first female authors in France. And it's a story about female empowerment in education and how receiving an education helps a woman to empower herself. It's a celestial journey story, and it's an allegory. There's this figure of the Sibyl, that's the lady in pink on the right. The one on the left is Christine de Pizan. So the Sibyl was this wise, learned figure who takes Christine de Pizan on this journey around the world to teach her the value of education. And this sort of became a metaphor for me and my relationship with Dr. Walters and my other professors later in college. She helped me get a scholarship to go study abroad, and she helped me get into graduate school for my doctorate at the University of Virginia. So while I was in grad school, my family was still struggling, and things were getting even worse. My dad was still drinking. My mom was still using opioids. My oldest brother was now a full-blown alcoholic and neglecting his infant son. My youngest brothers dropped out of high school. They started using meth, intravenous drugs. They went to jail, rehab, were living in their car at various times. And I was off in Virginia and Paris and traveling the world. I got to go to France twice on scholarships. I got to hone my teaching skills as a TA. I published my dissertation and 2 articles. I earned my master's and doctorate, was the first person in my family on both sides to finish graduate school. And I got married and had my first son. So this brings me back to the last word of the evening, education. Education, it comes from the Latin ex ducere, to lead out. And that is what my education did for me. It led me out of a traumatic situation and empowered me to, this picture here is also from Le Chemin de Longue Étude, and we see Christine de Pizan and the Sibyl are about to climb this ladder up to heaven. That's what my education was for me. It helped me climb out. So coming back to this term of empowerment, the pouvoir, the I can, what have languages in education empowered me to do? Well, I can read, write, listen, and speak multiple languages. I can understand and speak about my intergenerational trauma and shame. I have been able to break the cycle with my family, and now I can inspire others through my teaching.